An 18th century Polish encyclopedia says that dragons are difficult to vanquish, but that one must try. So, today we're taking a look at church history to find out, how do we fight dragons? The word dragon means a great serpent, and there are tales of dragons all around the world. We don't have time in this video to go through all of the world's mythology regarding dragons. While we're not here to argue for the literal existence of dragons, we have found a few interesting points on that topic, but mostly we're just here to tell you some great stories. The story of St. George we have already told on this channel, we have a whole video about him. But St. George is not the only saint for whom we have a dragon killing story. He's not even the first. So today we're going to take a look at some of the other dragon-killing saints and have a look at some of the common threads that unite these stories. We all know about the story of the serpent tempting Eve in the Garden of Eden, but the first real dragon battle happens in the book of Daniel. You will find it in Orthodox and Catholic Bibles to this day, and it is part of a chapter known as Bel and the Dragon. In this chapter, Daniel is having an argument about the gods with the king. The king's favorite god is one named Bel, who has a gigantic bronze statue. Now, Daniel quickly proves to the emperor that this god is a fraud. The food that they're feeding him every night is being stolen by the priest and eaten secretly in secret passageways. And so the king rejects the god Bel. And then something interesting happens. The king presents to Daniel another god, a living, breathing dragon. The king actually says to Daniel, "Will you also say that this is made of bronze? Look, he lives, he eats, and he drinks. You cannot say that he is not a living god. Therefore, worship him." Daniel does not deny the existence of the dragon. He says he will only worship the one true God, and to prove that this dragon is not worth worshipping, he kills it. What's interesting about this story is how non-magical it is. Dragons seem to exist in this story as, even then, rare creatures, things that were mistaken for gods. So now we're going to skip ahead several centuries into Christianity, into a very little known writing by St. John of Damascus. He was an incredible saint, and we'll do a video about him at some point. He lived from the 7th into the 8th century, and he is most famous for his defense of iconography, and he wrote something on dragons. In this letter, which isn't readily available in English at the moment, he is addressing some Christians who have some questionable ideas of what a dragon is. What's strange about this letter is St. John says that dragons are real. I am not telling you that there are no dragons. Dragons exist, but they are just serpents born of other serpents. When they're just born and young, they are little, but when they eat and grow to full age, they are large and fat and are bigger than any other serpent. St. John then says in fairly mechanical terms that dragons normally grow to around 14 meters long. He then quotes from an ancient Roman source that we actually also have of a dragon that was killed by soldiers during the Carthaginian Wars, and the skin of which was taken back to Rome and studied. And then St. John provides biological descriptions of 3 different species of dragon, talking about horned protrusions on the back of their heads, about flaps of skin under their jaws. He talks about them having golden eyes. So to sum up, St. John of Damascus says dragons are real, flesh and blood creatures, but they're no big deal. So perhaps dragons have existed. Perhaps there have been these monsters that have inspired terror in the pagans. And perhaps a lot of these stories of dragons being killed actually come from real life monsters. We can't say this for certain, of course, but it is intriguing to think about, isn't it? The earliest saint reported to have slain a dragon is Saint Theodore the Tyro, a great saint about whom we already have an entire episode. Soon after the events of this story, he destroys a pagan temple and is executed for the Christian faith. So there is a running trend in the life of Saint Theodore of fighting evil. Over time, since Theodore, more and more saints have become associated with dragon-killing stories. Some of these stories may be entirely mythical, and some of them may have a root in fact. Either way, these are images that we can all understand. They are fairly believable ways of describing a battle between good and evil. The dragons of historical stories are not these kind of talking, fire-breathing monsters of today. Remember that most people through history have accepted the existence of dragons, that dragons existed somewhere. They're fairly believable animals, and it is believable that they can be killed. So rather than Christians using dragons to heighten up stories, it is better to see it as the other way around. It is condensing a story, perhaps, a life of fighting evil, a life of resisting the devil, condensed into a physical flesh and blood battle that we can kind of get behind. It is a way of telling us, the hearers of these stories, that we too can fight and defeat dragons, but we have to do it the way the saints did it. So let's go through a few stories. These are not in any particular order. The first we're going to look at is Saint Philip the Apostle, who, in a medieval account, is said to have arrived at the city of Hierapolis, where the locals are said to have been worshipping a dragon that lived underneath the temple. This dragon was said to have poisonous breath that killed animals as they were brought as sacrifices to it. Saint Philip is said to have entered the temple and rebuked the dragon, killing it, bricking up the entrance to its lair and putting a cross over the top of it. A church was then built and dragons never bothered anyone there again. In this particular story, we have an interesting conclusion, which is that in the 20th century, archaeologists at Hierapolis found something that they have referred to as the Gate to Hell, a volcanic fissure in the earth through which carbon dioxide pours out and is still known to have killed passing birds. There is a Catholic church in Venice that claims to contain within it the ribs of a dragon stolen by a crusader from a church in Greece, where it is said that they are the results of a dragon killed by Saint Donatus. This dragon was living in a well, ruining the water supply, and he brought it out and destroyed it. The 6th century Welsh saints Samson of Dol or Paul Aurelian are two of many saints from the British Isles and from France said to have killed dragons. Both of them are then said to have bound the dragon's throat up in their stole. Now, the stole is a very traditional vestment of clergy in the church. This is a symbol of their ordination and of their ministry in Christ. It's a sign of their authority as clergy of Christ's church, and a priest cannot do services without wearing one of these. By tying a dragon's head up in a stole, it is saying that the priest or the bishop that has killed this dragon has not done so through his own strength. He has done so through the ordination of Christ and the calling of Christ to his ministry. Legend says that Saint Romanos of Rouen killed a dragon. The pagan natives of this particular area would take a condemned criminal and tie him to a stake out in the swamp. They would do this fairly often to keep the dragon satiated. Saint Romanos heard about this and went out into the swamp when one of these criminals was staked out there. When the dragon came out of the swamp, Saint Romanos came and stood between the condemned man and the beast. Saint Romanos made the sign of the cross, and the dragon fell down dead at his feet. He tied up its head in a stole, and it was dragged back into the city. The head was cut off, the dragon's body was burnt, and it is said that the head of the dragon was installed on a pike outside the small church in Rouen. The dragon's name had been Gargoyle. For years in this city, it was tradition for a condemned criminal to have his death sentence commuted on the festival of Saint Romanos of Rouen. It's not just men that have killed dragons, there are some ladies that have done this as well. There is a medieval story of Saint Martha of Bethany, that's Lazarus' sister, being in France and finding a place that was being persecuted by a dragon. She went to where this dragon lived, making the sign of the cross in front of it. The dragon was weak as it came out towards her. She tied up the dragon's neck in her belt and dragged it into the town, asked for a sword, and killed it. To this day, the city of Tarascon in France loves Saint Martha, and there is a dragon on the coat of arms. Saint Elizabeth, the wonder worker of Constantinople, was granted land on which to build a monastery. When she got to this remote place, she found that the land had come with its very own dragon that the locals were terrified of. She called the dragon forth, and when it came out of the cave, she made the sign of the cross in front of it, and it fell at her feet and died. Saint Sylvester of Rome encountered a dragon living in the sewers underneath the city. Now, this dragon had, during the pagan era of Rome, lived underneath one of the temples and had routinely been fed, but now that the pagan temples had mostly been shut down, it was hungry, and it was stalking the people of Rome and dragging them down. Now, strangely, it was only killing pagans. It didn't seem to be hunting any of the Christians, but Saint Sylvester felt that as a resident of Rome, he should be protecting all Romans, and it is said that he descended down into the tunnels and sewers of Rome to find this creature. Eventually, Saint Sylvester came face to face with the dragon in the darkness. Now, this story is slightly stranger than most, because Sylvester doesn't kill the dragon, but sews the dragon's mouth and throat shut, and then the dragon turns around and retreats deep into the darkness underneath Rome, and has not been seen since. There is a dragon-killing story from Bulgaria of a saint named Michael, who was renowned as a warrior saint. He went out and fought major battles and protected his people, but when he came home, he found that there was a town being attacked by a dragon living in the lake. Saint Michael goes out, fights and kills the dragon, saving the people, but in an unusual twist on the story of saints killing dragons. In this particular one, Michael is injured by the beast and later dies of his injuries sustained in that battle. Now, not all dragon and saint stories are so violent. Not all dragon and saint stories involve killing anyone. Saint Simeon the Stylite, a monk famous for praying atop a pillar in the desert, was once approached by a dragon. It came ambling out of the wilderness towards him and curled up at the foot of the pillar. The monk saw that it had a plank of wood stuck deeply into its eye. Saint Simeon stooped down, prayed, and gently pulled the wood out of the creature's eye. The dragon turned around, went back into the wilderness, into its cave, and never bothered anyone. Another saint named Ammon lived in a small monastery in the deserts of Egypt. What little food he had, because this was a remote monastery, was often stolen by passing brigands and raiders. At one point, he simply had enough, and it is said that he walked away from the monastery into the wilderness. He came back leading 2 small dragons, which he placed at either end of the monastery as guardians, and that a group of raiders came again to steal the monastery's food, and were struck with fear and terror at these dragons just seemingly following everything that the monks were telling them to do. Saint Ammon actually gave these thieves lunch and prayed with them and talked to them, and they became loyal monks in that monastery. So what are some of the lessons we can take away from the common threads of these stories? Well, first of all, we can know that dragons are real. How they may look in your life may differ to the one in St. George's life, but you will encounter dragons. The 20th century author G.K. Chesterton once wrote, "Fairy tales do not give children the idea of the evil or the ugly. That is in the child already, because it is in the world already. The baby has known the dragon intimately ever since he had an imagination. What the fairy tale provides for him is a St. George to kill the dragon." Secondly, dragons often live in or around water. Now, water is a treasure. It's a precious resource, so it is very much like the dragons of modern fairy tales that guard treasure. But water is also needed for life, and these dragons get between us and what we need for our lives. Thankfully, Christ has victory over the waters. Every year on the Feast of Theophany, which is the day we remember Christ's baptism, where we remember his sanctification of the waters, we have in a hymn these words, "You have bowed your head before the forerunner, and have crushed the heads of the dragons. You have descended into the waters, and have given light to all things." So thirdly, the authority of Christ is greater than the power of the dragons. The stole is a symbol of Christ's authority. So we read in the scriptures, "Behold, I give you the authority to trample on serpents and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you." Christ's authority triumphs, and we need our priests and our bishops and the sacraments. So if you have dragons to fight, please visit an Orthodox church and talk to a priest about how to defeat them. Fourth and final, and the reason that dragons appear in our stories at all, dragons can be killed. They can be killed through the power of the cross of Christ. Almost every story of a saint dealing with a dragon involves them making the sign of the cross. What Christ accomplished on the cross is more powerful than any dragon, no matter its size, no matter its form, that you will ever encounter. All of our episodes are accompanied with a tea, and today's tea is Longjing green tea, and that is also known as Dragon's Well tea. So you have the dragon and water connection again. If you are enjoying our program and would like to help us, please consider a monthly donation towards the making of Patristix. Thank you very much, and God bless. I forgot to say that I really do like this tea. It's a very pleasant green tea. I've not had it before. We got it especially for this episode.